Well, hello everyone, Ivana Taylor here, and I want to welcome you to the Monday edition of Bizapalooza Chat, where we are plugged in and ready to control the things that are taking control of your business. Now, today, I am so excited. Yes, we're talking about email, we're talking about email marketing, but email marketing is transforming. It is evolving, and it has everything to do with you and your brain on email. And so to help me answer all those questions, I am so excited about my guest today. Wait till you guys see. His name is Jacob Zweig. Zweig, is it Jacob? Is that right?
Yeah, it's close enough.
I don't know. What is it really?
It's Zweig.
Zweig. Okay, great. Got it. All right, so I'm here with Jacob. He is one of the co-founders of Optimail, which is a brand new way of doing email. It is so exciting, and I'm not going to say any more. I'm just going to introduce you to Jacob. Hi, Jacob, and welcome.
Hello, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Excited. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your background, because that, I think I received, it wasn't a pitch. I received an email from you guys. Somehow I got an email and we got into a conversation, and you said that you're not a marketer, really. What are
No,
you?
not at all. So actually my background, well, I have a bit of a diverse background. Initially, I worked as a UX consultant for a number of years. And then I decided to really switch up and went back to grad school. So I just finished my PhD in neuroscience. I studied perception. So multisensory perception specifically. So really I studied how your sensory systems work together. And to do that, I use a lot of electrophysiological measures. So if you've ever seen like the EEG cap,
Yeah,
cap they put on, it's kind of like that, except that goes under your skull, so on the surface of your brain.
That sounds painful.
I do imagine it was painful. I've never had it happen to me, fortunately. But so that's the majority of my work was decoding those signals, so listening to those electrical signals that are coming from the brain and trying to understand what a person was seeing or listening to, and how those different sensory systems kind of work together by looking at those signals.
You know, so our topic today is your brain on email, but I think I want to kind of step back a little bit.
Sure.
What has been happening to our brains as we relate to our devices these days? What do you know about that?
Oh, so I don't think it's good. I think generally attention spans are decreasing, which certainly impacts the way that we do marketing, right? Of course, we want to capture people's attention and be relevant. But really having so many devices is, I think, shortening our attention spans. And there's actually some kind of interesting research where they take mice and they put them in these environments where they have really bright lights and kind of flashing and really loud, as if you were watching a cartoon. Especially kids' cartoons these days. I feel like the cartoons that we used to watch were a bit calmer, a bit slower, but cartoons these days are super crazy. And it impacted these mice. It impacted their ability to retain information and form new memories. So I don't think it's great. And I think, honestly, if you can, try to take some time away from devices. It's good for your mental health. Absolutely.
So what you're saying is that our relationship with screens in particular, right, that have light coming out at us, actually, I've read a book about that it does impact how we process information. Is that what you said?
Exactly, absolutely. So screens, I don't know if it's necessarily the screen itself, but potentially just the rapid information that we're taking in all the time. We get so inundated with information, and of course you're looking at your phone for the next thing to go off. So you get kind of addicted to this really rapid release of dopamine that's associated with these rewards that we get so frequently now. So not sure exactly what the cause is, but yeah, generally not great for us.
So what did you learn about, let's go back to how we process information, right? So clearly there's action, like even right now in the Twitter stream, there's like stream coming down, right? I'm looking at the stream, I'm looking at you. What's that doing to how I process what's happening? Am I retaining, not retaining, or is it just different?
Well, I think it modifies the way that we take in information when things are so transient. You don't have to really deeply encode so much more information. So whereas if you're, say, sitting down with the intention of reading an article or a book. You really focus directly on that. And your goal is to take that information and form memories from it and encode it at a deep level to really understand the content that you're seeing. Versus when things are kind of streaming by, it really is more transient. So you don't necessarily care to encode so deeply the information. It doesn't matter so much long term. So I think we're just potentially we need to be, well, we adapt in that we become more sensitive about what we take in and what we really pay attention to.
Got it. Got it. So if we were to prepare ourselves to consume information off of a screen, such as an email, for example,
yeah,
is there something that we should do, or, you know, am I just overcomplicating things?
So I think it's important to, I think attention is a skill that needs to be practiced. I think we often think, like, people often dismiss, they say, oh, I have a bad attention span. But in actuality, it's a skill like any other that we can learn. So really taking the time to practice things that increase your attention span, things like focused meditation, and really taking the time to focus and train your ability to pay attention is useful broadly. So that when you are, say, going to read some information that you want to take in or really want to focus on, you have those attentional resources to be able to focus in that way. So I think generally, don't be so quick to dismiss your own attention span. Really pay attention to, or really just understand that you have the ability to pay attention. It's something that you can learn and practice and train and get better at.
Yep, absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about what we can do as consumers of information, but now let's flip the tables a little bit and let's talk about us as people who want to communicate online, who want to communicate with our customers, whether it's through, like, you know, articles or social media or email. What should we keep in mind about our readers?
Yeah, so that relates really directly, right? Because we have to be aware of the fact that most people are going to be not paying attention or reading things really quickly. And I think it points to the fact that you have to be very quickly relevant and informative to be able to capture that audience and make a connection and really make yourself and your business valuable and worthwhile to that customer. Because after all, given what we know about attention, they're pretty likely to kind of click in and click out really quickly. And if you look at analytics of your site, for example, you see this happens all the time. You see bounce rates that are just astronomical sometimes. And the real skill for us and for marketers and designers is to figure out how to latch on and create something that's relevant right away, to distill our messages down into a format that's easily digestible in a few words, so that people can decide, okay, this is something that I want to dive into further. Because once you capture them, once you get their attention, I think from there it's a bit easier, right? People will dive into content. People will, if they're interested and if they want to know more, they'll get into that. But that's a real challenge. And with email, we have things like subject lines, right? Like you see your inbox full of emails. How do you write a good subject line? That's a really tricky thing. In fact, I personally, I'm not so good at it. As we said, I'm not really an email marketing person, so it's a bit new to me. And I'm sure many of your audience has some great experiences of how to write great subject lines, but it's certainly a skill that's quite challenging.
So let's talk a little bit about that. How does a neuroscientist move? Okay, so I get you had the UX experience, and then you have this PhD in neuroscience. Talk about the moment where you decided to focus on email.
Yeah.
Like, what was it about that?
So as we were getting towards the end of our degrees, with one of my friends who I was at Northwestern with, we had been working quite a bit on different machine learning problems, statistics, data science. So we actually decided to form a data science consulting firm. So we're still running that. That's Strong Analytics. So at Strong Analytics, we spend a lot of our time building predictive models, trying to figure out, like, which customers are relevant, how much somebody's going to spend, their lifetime value, who you should send things to, what things you should recommend, all sorts of things like that. But the problem that we saw is really that it's difficult to know what to do with that information, how to take the next step. So let's say you have a bunch of customers and you have a bunch of lead scores. Now what, right? So you probably want to contact some of your best customers, but what do you contact them with? What about the bottom customers? Do you just ignore them? Do you send them something else? Like, it's really challenging to make that leap, to have this information. Even if you have a great prediction, it's hard to know what to do with that. So we decided to take a stab at it because we kind of knew a bit about some of these techniques that allow you to get at that information, to learn what to do, and to make predictions not about what the individual is going to, their lead score or anything like that, but really to make the prediction about what steps that you can do and how that's going to impact their interaction with your business. So we focused on email because it's really I think it's the bedrock of customer communication. So I think we'll probably talk about this a bit later. And I think people often say email is dead, but I think email is far from dead. Every day we wake up to tons of emails, and every company really is using email as the way to interact with their customers. But I think people are using it not in the best way. People don't really necessarily understand the impact of it or understand what the right information to send is, when to send it. And the reason that is because it's a hard problem, because there's so many different factors that go into how somebody responds. We mentioned attention, and attention is related to so many different things that can predict how engaged somebody is with you. So it's a hard problem. And we decided to try to tackle it with some of the statistics and machine learning techniques that we knew and were familiar with. And I think we put something together that's working pretty well and kind of surprised us. To be honest, it really surprised us because our first stab at this was just a little Python script that we put together and decided, hey, let's test it out, see how it does. And it did quite well. So what's kind of interesting about human behavior is we all tend to think we're very unique and distinct and unpredictable, but often our behaviors are quite a bit more predictable than you might expect. Obviously not perfectly predictable, but many of the ways that we respond are predictable.
Say more about that. So how are we all predictable?
Yeah, so I mean, generally, we in our lives we're all probably quite predictable. In fact, I was talking to my parents about this yesterday. So my mom said my dad is predictable because anything she says he's going to try to do the opposite. But generally, we have routines and we follow them, and you can tell. I mean, just sort of naively, if you wanted to predict who's going to be a great user of your product or service, you can look at who is using it most often and look at who's most engaged, and they're probably going to remain the most engaged. So things like that. I mean, generally, people don't do dramatic 180s in their life or in their behaviors. People tend to be pretty consistent with what they do. So in that way, we can learn from the types of behaviors that they do to be able to predict in the future what they're going to do.
Got it. Okay, so I've got to take a step somewhere, maybe slightly off to the side of the sidewalk.
Sure.
Let's explain, what is machine learning, deep learning, artificial intelligence? Are they all different or the same?
So that's an interesting question. So deep learning is something that I have my most experience with. So machine learning generally is a way to take some information and use some type of algorithm to be able to predict what's going to come out, to be able to predict the future, to be able to predict something that you haven't seen yet. So let's say the classic example of machine learning is the Titanic problem, right? So you have a bunch of information, you know what cabin people were staying in, you know what gender they are, you know a bunch of information about them, and you want to predict whether they survived or if they didn't survive. So you can look at a small subset of that data, train a model to be able to predict whether they survived or not. And now from that, you can look at new examples that you haven't seen, and the goal is to predict, did this person survive or not? So in that way, you're making inferences about data that you haven't yet seen in the world. And that's really, at its core, what machine learning is. There's a ton of different techniques that kind of fall into that. And deep learning has become really popular recently because there's been a lot of really great successes. But at its core, deep learning really is about using multi-layered neural networks. Mm-hmm. So Neural networks sounds scary, right? It sounds like it's the Terminator taking over, but it's actually not quite so scary. And I think the name is a bit misleading. But really what a neural network is it's a set of nodes that make decisions. So let's make it easy to understand. So let's take a single node, right? So let's say we want to decide if today I'm going to go out to lunch, right?
Right.
So I'm going to input a couple of different information. I'm going to input some different information from the world, right? So is it nice out? It's beautiful here in Chicago. So that makes me a little bit more likely. Have I gotten my paycheck recently? No. So that makes me a little bit less likely. Am I really hungry? Am I quite hungry? So maybe I will go out after this. So we have those three pieces of information. We're going to put that into a single node that flows in, and then we make a decision. The decision that comes out is yes or no, right? Am I going out to lunch?
Right.
So from that, let's say with those pieces of information to decide I'm not going to go out to lunch. Now, what a neural network is, that's a single node of them. Now you start chaining those together, and each node of those feeds information to a second, to further layers of information. So in that way, you're making decisions from decisions from decisions. So it's this nonlinear combination of features, what we call high-dimensional features, because it's information that's derived from your original input information to then derive features from that, and then features from that. So really at its core, deep learning is these neural networks, multi-layered neural networks, what we call deep neural networks, anything beyond 2 layers, really. And from that, we derive lots and lots of different techniques. And really, at its core, they're just slightly different architectures that allow us to use deep learning in different ways. So for image recognition, people will use what are called convolutional neural networks. And basically, they take a sliding window over an image and derive some features. Like language processing, we use things like recurrent neural networks, which take in time snippets after sequential time snippets. You can go in both directions as well, and make decisions from that. So you learn about temporal information, how information is unfolding over time. And then there's all sorts of all the crazy things you'll see, like generative adversarial networks are used to generate new faces. And so if you've never seen a face before, or if you'll train the model to generate a face that it's never seen before, something new, something totally novel that it's never seen in the world. So deep learning is a technique that uses these neural networks and a variety of different structures to do really cool, interesting things. And then AI is, AI, I think, encompasses all of that, right? So you have machine learning, you want something that's going to be able to predict. But really, I think there's a lot of different definitions of AI. But for me, and what I think is important is that with artificial intelligence, you're interacting with the world, you're learning from those interactions, and then adjusting what you're going to do. So just like a baby tries things out, right? They're going to explore what does the water fit in this glass, or like, if I bite this, what happens? And in that way, they're learning from the world via this what's called reinforcement learning. So you try things, you see what happens, and then you learn from that. You learn from those experiences. So you have this kind of feedback loop. And I think that's really what's important for artificial intelligence. And like if you think of robots that are interacting in the world, you want them to be able to do things and learn from their experiences. And in that way, that's the product that we built. That's really at its core. It's going to learn from those interactions with the world. So it's going to try different things and learn from what happens. So I think that's really, to me, what defines artificial intelligence. I think there's a lot of variety, and every single person you ask will have a slightly different definition.
Sure.
But really, that's at the core.
No, I think that's really interesting. So let's bring it back to the email. There's a whole fun conversation going on. People are answering questions. And the topic that we're sort of exploring is, you know, what you got me thinking about is, could I be excited about getting an email again?
Yes.
You know, I actually had a compact computer. That was my first computer that I got back in 1994, 1995, right? And Dennis Miller would come out and give you a greeting, and then I got AOL, and I still remember that feeling
Yeah.
You got mail. And it was like every day, you know, like you were saying, there's that ding, there's that something that says, I am excited.
Yeah.
Right? So, of course, we don't have that feeling anymore.
Yeah.
You know, now we have spam filters and we have all kinds of things, and we take email for granted. What's happened and what needs to happen to make email exciting again?
Yeah. So you're right. That doesn't happen for the majority of emails, but I'm sure that there are times where you're sitting waiting for something to come, or you're really kind of excited to get some particular email. And usually that's when it's something personal, right? Or if something relevant. Like for me, when I get emails from my customers, that's super exciting, right? Like there's nothing more satisfying than hearing somebody's experience using something that you've built and sort of like poured your soul into to really make. So that's super exciting for me. And I think in that way, what's important is to be able to write emails that are personal and are informative. So like every morning, not to call, there's one particular company, and I'm sure maybe you guys have this as well. For me, there's one company that every single day sends me a 20% coupon, literally every day. And it's irrelevant, right? Like I know now, if I'm gonna go shop at their store and I want a coupon, I can just look online and get it. It's not like it's annoying. It's gotten to the point of annoyance, really. And so, on the other hand, though, so in building this, of course, like, and I'm sure you guys are familiar as well. Often you sign up for services that you want to use, and you're exploring them and learning about them and what they can do, and trying to figure out if this is something you want to pay for, if it's something relevant to you. And I've really started to enjoy getting an email if I sign up for a service, getting an email that shows me something that I didn't know about, shows me that the service is going to be really useful for me. So I think what's challenging, but what really has potential is revealing information, revealing features, and revealing useful information at a rate that is not annoying. Things that are appealing, things that are personal in that way. So that's a whole other conversation is really how to figure out the rate at which you should email people and how that can be not as annoying. So that's something that we've thought about quite a bit, and it's really difficult. It's difficult to learn how to send information at the right time. Mm-hmm. But that's really what it comes down to. Relevant, well-timed personal information is what I think generally excites people. It's what excites me if I'm going to get information. So,
some comments.
Sure.
From the chat. So right now we're asking about, I think question 3, which is what emails, or question 2, what emails get your attention, which is just what we were talking about.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks are saying that what's important is some people are talking about using video. Tinu says that they're looking at humor, hard to pull off in text. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
For sure.
We also were talking about what kind of things they want to do in their email strategy. And Dorothy, who's one of our regular attendees, says, I would love for people to sign up. I'm totally remiss on this subject. I, of course, would love to have a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I love what Gabriella says. She says, quality content, tailored message, visually appealing, and incentives to take actions. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually, because so I'm not an email person. I built a tool that doesn't make you be an email person, but I think a lot of people certainly have more experience with this than I do. But in my personal experience, and that's kind of limited to SaaS, really, I found that really plain text emails are sometimes more impactful. They're definitely more personal. And I think generally our goal is to write an email that obviously came from somebody individually. I think generally makes me more excited, makes me more likely to engage compared to something that's obviously an advertisement. And I think when we're doing automation, there's a temptation to want to write these really kind of flashy, cool, colorful emails. But in my experience, what often works best is these kind of personal, dull, just regular old emails. But what's important there is that it's not the content that's dull. It's just the message itself is personal and engaging. Really, it's also quite a challenge to write great content. That's something that's very difficult. But
well, not everyone is meant to do email for whatever reason. Even though people have said that I write great email, I give great email. I'm not always sure because I don't get the right outcome, or at least I don't get the desired outcome. So I would say that, and that's actually taking us to our next conversation point, which is all about technology. How can technology help us have a more organized email and help us with our email strategy?
Yeah, so I think what's really interesting is the point that you just raised about thinking about these goals of an email campaign, right? So I think that's something that's really quite difficult to measure using most of our tools, right? So we have some analytics generally when we're sending emails. We can see opens and we can see clicks, but typically when you run an email campaign, your goal isn't to get people to open things. I mean, obviously you want them to open and see your content, but that's not what's in the end important to your business, right? So for a business, what's important are things like who purchases and who's engaged and reading my content and going and exploring and signing up for free trial, and all those sorts of things that if you were actually to measure the metrics that you want to see for your business, those are the important metrics that you want to see. So it's difficult to make the connection though between your email strategy. So I'm sending this content out on this day, and now like the impact on the actual metrics that you're interested in, purchasing, things like that. So I think there are some ways to do it that are really kind of like convoluted, like you'll set up this to trigger this metric to see this and then to run this experiment. But it's really difficult. So I think where technology excels, and not to sort of go back to what we built, that's sort of really was our goal, is to understand how to make that connection between the email strategies that you're taking and those ultimate business goals. So to make that connection. And I had mentioned before, really, in terms of AI, what I think is relevant is learning from that information, trying things and seeing what happens, and then adjusting. That's where you make that connection and learn about how the strategy works. And that's something that technology really excels at, because we can digest so much information in a really quick and useful manner. So whereas a human looking at all this information, not to diminish, of course, as humans, we're really good at lots of things, and we're really good at summarizing and looking at something really quickly and taking a gist, and we do a lot of things that computers can't do. But one thing that computers do excel at is this ability to rapidly perform statistical computation. And in that way, in email is a great it's a great venue for this, because so much data comes in as you do send each email, and each individual customer who's interacting with your business has all different behaviors and performs all different things on your website. So many different interactions, and really it's a great venue to be able to learn in that way, using statistical computation to adjust your email strategy, to learn what's working, and kind of on the fly change things. So that's something I think technology is really good at, and it's hopefully able to really adjust the way that we think of how to make an email campaign and how we actually implement our email strategies.
Well, this whole AI and neural networking is really making a big impact. So for example, your tool might help people deliver the email at the optimum time, which email to deliver and at what time.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, I think there are actually, I have some type of app or tool that has attempted to help me write a better email. Now, I love what Ken Gordon says. He's Quick Muse on Twitter, and he says, part of the problem is that lots of people think that email is only about spamming folks with HTML letters. And that actually has me asking the question, long email or short email? Because you just told me earlier that, our attention span is shortened, right? And I know even from the communication we've had around this chat, right?
Mm-hmm.
I sent, like, there's a script and there's instructions there, and there's an email and there's instructions there, and that's like a lot of information.
And I got confused. I missed something, right? So
Right. So that happens all, because like, it's almost like
there's a lot of information. Yeah.
a lot of important information in a
Right.
teeny tiny space.
Yeah. That's a really a challenging thing, is to convey a lot of information in a clear and concise way. And definitely something that I think I need to work at, and I think everyone needs to be better at. But I think generally the shorter and more concise and more to the point your email messaging is, the more effective it's going to be. That's not always possible, right? Like sometimes there is a lot of information we need to convey, but we need to be clear about the we need to be clear about our intention, right? So if you're going to send a lot of information, it's got to be at a time where that's relevant and where somebody needs that information. So just kind of spamming people with these big, long emails is probably not going to be effective. And people just will, as your reader mentioned, people spamming people like that it's not a good strategy. So when you're going to do that, it's important to make sure that it's really at the right time, that person at that moment needs that information. Yeah.
So it sounds like it's a good strategy to perhaps parse out your emails so that there's really only like one call to action. There's only one thing to click on. There's only one thing to process. Would you agree with that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So the other thing is that I think broadly I would agree with that, but that depends on your customers, that depends on your business, that depends on the time of year, that depends on so many factors that it's hard to broadly make a recommendation. So I think a better strategy is to try different things. So to test out a longer email versus a shorter email, one subject line versus another, a longer sequence versus a shorter sequence. Really to be testing these things continuously, not just one single test and say like, oh, this email's better. Maybe that email's better at the time, but maybe that email's not better if you change one other email. Maybe that email's not better if you deliver it on a different day at some different time. So what's important is to be continually testing and exploring and trying different strategies and figuring out what works for your audience, for each individual, and for your business as a whole.
So is that where this artificial intelligence can really become handy, right?
Yep, absolutely. So one of the real benefits is that using artificial intelligence, you can do continuous optimization. So rather than that like static A/B test where you're one and done, you see this email had this higher click rate, which again, of course, you want to see goals rather, not click rates. But with artificial intelligence, you can set up experiments that are continuously running. So it's going to be always trying different things, always trying different techniques and adapting. So things are changing over time. Your business is not static. Your customers are not static. All these things are changing dynamically, and it's important to be continuously testing like that. And this is really, as you said, where artificial intelligence really excels, in that it allows us to do this continuous testing without hiring, say, like a team of 300 marketers to be working around the clock and every day doing slightly different tests and trying to take information from that. Because it is, in the end, it's very subtle signals, right? So what we learn from our customers is the change in their behavior. We learn how the actions that we take change their interaction with our business. And people vary, people do different things, and ultimately the things that they do, it's often something a bit subtle. So it's hard to parse that information out unless you're really looking at it in a lot of detail and with a lot of time. So paying attention to your data, really looking at how your change in strategy impacts your customers, that's what's really important. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about behavioral triggers.
Yes.
Right? I think this is key whenever we're talking about artificial intelligence, because it's behavior that drives it. It's behavior that drives when something gets sent out or which part gets sent out. I think when you and I first talked, one of the things that just kind of spun me out completely is how you have turned the entire email, I'm going to use the word email more, email campaign process on its ear.
Mhm.
right? Typically, what we'll do is somebody opts into something. That's a
Yep.
behavior, and that triggers like a welcome email,
Yep.
right? And then maybe in that welcome email, there might be multiple things they can click on. And then depending on what they click on, that's like another behavior.
Yeah.
But you are actually, so what we do is what we're trained to do, and what all of our systems do, is we pre-program and schedule out a campaign,
Yeah.
based on, what we think should happen and when.
Yep.
But now you're shifting that, and you're letting the consumer's behavior drive what happens. Can you talk a little bit about how that works? Because,
Yeah.
people need to know that.
Definitely. So you're right. And the standard way, the standard way that someone would build a drip campaign, there's really two ways. The most basic way, and what most people do, is, as you mentioned, just set up a set of emails. So let's say it's like an onboarding campaign. You set up that welcome email to go out once they sign up, and then you say 2 days later send this, 2 days later send this, 2 days later send this, and it's static. It doesn't matter what the person does. It's really just this little sequence that you send out. And the other way to do it is really almost exactly the opposite, is to build these decision trees where you're really going into a ton of detail about, if they do this, do this, but if this, then this, and if not that, then this. And it can become super unwieldy, and it's really difficult to build those, and even more difficult to test them, to modify them, and to update them. So those can be great, right? Like, if those, of course, you can build great campaigns with decision trees, but it's a bit complicated. And again, they still are generally, like, they're dynamic in that it's based on behavior, but they're static in that things are going to change over time. You're not going to try different strategies. What we've tried to do is to build a tool that automatically is going to learn the order, timing, and who to send things to, because we know that people don't respond in the same ways. And as you mentioned, behavioral triggers, behavior is important. And in fact, we just a few weeks ago, we read a blog post about this. We as data scientists, we're really interested in the data as well, right? So we took some of our data and kind of took a deep dive in and looked at it. And one of the things that was really striking is a really clear finding about when to message the next email that was based on their engagement. So if somebody is really engaged with your service, if they open the last email, if they went to your website, it's good to keep sending them information at a really soon delay. So even like next day, you might want to send them more information. They're engaged with you. They're giving this clear signal that they want more information. Versus if you take that same strategy, if you're emailing somebody the next day after they miss a bunch of emails, or after they are just generally not showing engagement with your service, you're much more likely to get an unsubscribe. You're more likely to be annoying people. And you don't want to do that. Versus if you wait a little bit and then send them the information at the right time with a bit more of a delay, they're more likely to engage in your product. So you see this actually really neat curve where their likelihood of engagement goes down this first day and then slowly rises up and then goes down again. So it's important to time that right. And it's important to be able to engage each customer based on what they're doing. So that, again, is something that you would never learn unless you've sent hundreds and hundreds of thousands of emails and have really looked at that data in this particular way that allows you to do this statistical analysis. So it's something that, yeah.
So this is big.
Yep.
I think I had one of those Oprah aha moments, right? So let me get this straight. One of the benefits of neural networks, machine learning, and artificial intelligence is that you're actually looking at massive amounts of data.
Correct.
Right? Which you said earlier, people are more predictable than we think, right?
Right.
If I'm a small business owner and I don't send, and this is huge, all you people who are watching, this is so freaking huge, right? Because you got your Ryan Dices, you've got your Perry Marshalls, you've got people with lists that have sent millions upon millions of emails to mega lists that you and I will never, ever have. Maybe we don't want that big a list, right? But we don't have that, and they can be successful because they have that data, correct? When you have that much data, you're going to know. Whereas the rest of us who maybe have a list of 500 people or 1,000 people, or even 5,000 people, that's still not a big list.
No, it's hard to know, and it's hard to pull information from that without really, it's hard to pull useful information unless you take a really rigorous statistical approach to it, which I think your average business owner generally probably doesn't have the quite as much experience with statistics to be able to dive in that way. I'm sure there's some awesome statistics business owners out there who are like, wait, no, but I can do it better than you guys. And probably, yeah, absolutely. But I think for your general audience, it's challenging, and you have to know the right technique to use, because it can be really misleading. Statistics can be misused, and you see that all the time. We live in a time where statistics are everywhere and often quite misleading. And what's important is to use the right techniques to address these problems. So it's hard, and I think even with a lot of data, people often don't do it in a really great way. So it can be really misleading. So what we want to do is avoid that, and really use the right techniques and the right tools to give you information about what's working. And exactly, for the small business owner, you just don't have that data. So beyond even using the right technique, you don't have the data to be able to do that. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's the really big deal, because I think that's where small business owners struggle. If you don't have the data,
Sure.
then you're going to have a really hard time. You are sort of programming this campaign on a whim where you wouldn't really know. Whereas if you can get into using artificial intelligence with your email, and that sort of, is it sort of using like massive data sets? Where does this data come from that it's using in order to optimize your email delivery?
Yeah, so the data actually comes from interactions with your site. As I mentioned, I think the most important thing is that each business has different customers. Each business has slightly different interactions with their customers. And so what's important is to learn about what's working for that individual business. With that said, we do use a set of heuristics that kind of globally distill information into a similar space so that we can learn from it quickly. So we do use that sort of global information, but really every campaign is tailored to the individual business. And I think that's ultimately what's important. With that said, though, even with a small mailing list, you're getting a lot of interactions coming through, page views, purchases, opens, clicks, all this different information is coming through, and it actually adds up to be quite a lot of information. So yeah, it's learning about each individual business and campaign.
Got it. So it's customized to your audience.
Exactly.
So let's talk about audience and interaction, right? What do our brains like to see? Because the question is, do you use interactive elements in your email? So I want to know from the folks on the tweet chat, how do you engage with your customers? How do you get them to interact with your email? And my question to you, Mr. Brain Expert, is what do our brains like to see in email?
Yeah, that's a hard question, and I don't have a lot of experience. In my research, what I study is how people see and interpret the world, and most specifically how, say, like vision and audition combine together. So there are lots of differences in terms of like really low-level measures like reaction time, like you're faster to respond to some particular things. What that means in terms of how people engage with email, it's a bit more difficult to make that leap. I think there are some people trying to use neuroscience and some concepts from neuroscience to explain some types of marketing phenomenon that we see. I'm a bit skeptical because it's a challenge to make that leap, because really what we know about the brain, at least in my own experience, is these kind of low-level interactions. So how you see things in the world, and what your visual cortex does when you see like an edge, and how different areas of your brain respond when you have these sensory features that combine. But taking that to email marketing it's certainly a bit of a leap, and I don't have a great answer for that. What I can say though is that people generally respond to novelty, and from my own experience, again, really relevance and familiarity is something that you get people to respond to. Yeah, I mean, and there's, if we think about memory formation, novelty is really important, right? Things that are novel and really salient in your environment are more likely to make an impression, more likely to be encoded and stored. And I think in like television marketing, this is something that people pay attention to quite a bit, right? They want to have ads that are relevant and stick with you. Like, I don't know if anyone's from Chicago, but they have this jingle for Empire Carpet. I don't know if that's global. I don't know if that's nationwide. I don't know. Anyways,
it might be, because I think I know what
yeah,
you're going to say it. If you say
I can't say it because I can't give them free marketing, but it just sticks with you. And jingles, it's a great example of something that's quick, really simple, but for some reason it's pleasing and we remember it. And in that way, we want our emails to be useful and memorable and really get people to engage with our brand and our company. So I don't have a great answer for that. What I can say is that hopefully with our platform, it'll automatically learn that. But I don't know. Yeah, that's a challenge.
Well, I've got Dorothy says, I think people value content that offers an advantage supported by stats, comic or newsy. So this is your novelty.
Yeah, definitely.
A few folks have said being interactive and even inserting GIFs. I've actually just recently done a little fun thing with some clients. They wanted reminders every day. Mm-hmm. So I created a little mini campaign that sent them a reminder to do a specific task every single day. And I included GIFs in there.
Yeah.
And that's like really working, right?
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Okay. So, but Javier also mentioned statistics. So, and yet you and I both know that we are driven by emotion, and statistics are just kind of there to support our decision. What do you, yeah, right? You're making a face. Say more.
So yes, we're driven by emotion, but I think in many ways, the emotion that a particular advertisement or any stimulus in the environment, the emotion that it's going to elicit is generally predictable, right? Like, so we don't watch a horror movie and we're not surprised that we get scared, right? So it's intended to elicit that emotion. And in many ways, the content that we write is intended to elicit particular emotions. So someone mentioned humor before, and that's a great one. It's a hard one to do right because everyone has different senses of humor, of course. But that is intended to elicit a particular emotion. And kind of cycling back to that, the talk about salience and how kind of engaging something is. A strong emotion is much more likely to increase our ability to retain a memory about something. So of course we all have that like flashbulb memory, something really emotionally salient that we really just never forget. It's something that sticks with us. And we're probably not going to get that from an email. Well, it depends on the email. But creating an emotional response can generally increase the ability to retain a memory about an event. So it can be used in that way, yeah. Awesome. If you can elicit a good emotion.
Well, that's actually one of our questions is, you know, maybe you've even answered it, right? We know we need to have an emotional response. You know, humor is a good emotion, sometimes even. But, you know, something that's kind of interesting, I actually was listening to a podcast over the weekend, and they were talking about Facebook and the fact that all that sharing triggers this, that overstimulates our, what do you call it, comparison? Like we're constantly comparing ourselves to others.
Oh, yeah.
And like, while that's a normal emotion, that's a normal, that's not an emotion, but it's something.
Well, it's an emotion. It's probably like jealousy or envy or not a good emotion.
Right, exactly. And so, but it's, while that's a natural way of being as a human being, the constant checking on email or on Facebook kind of increases that. And I wonder, you know, as part of my work, I subscribe to a ton of email.
Yep.
And invariably, actually, I had to go through the process of unsubscribing to everything because of this comparison problem, the not good enough problem.
Yeah.
Right? To where I'm like, oh, look at this thing that they're doing. It's so cool. I should do that. No, I can't do that. You know, and I felt like it was taking me away from my focus. Mm-hmm. You know, so what emotions, I mean, aside from humor and those other kinds of things, there are also practical emotions like something like, what do I want to say? Not hope, around the, like, oh, I might actually be able to do this. Like, I do tip emails from time to time where I have a like
Yeah.
sneak a little tip, and those are like fun emotions. Like, oh, I'm excited, I could do this.
Yeah, that's a great point. And what I mentioned before about how I get excited when sometimes I sign up for something and they send something that I didn't know about, something that I can do, it I think makes you feel knowledgeable and informed, and I think those are positive emotions. So I think there's a real range of emotions that you can attempt to elicit, and I think each one has particular outcomes, right? Ultimately, though, if your goal is to be remembered and to be relevant, you want to elicit those particular positive emotions. You obviously don't want to get people annoyed and upset, and that's really what happens when you're sending too much email or you're sending irrelevant email. So I think it's important to learn the right information to send, and really the right time, how to space it, how to time that so you don't elicit those negative emotions, because it's quite easy to do that with email. And in fact, we've mentioned a couple of things like that darn 20% coupon that is always there. It certainly elicits annoyance, and I think that's probably generally not something you want to elicit from your customers. Maybe it depends upon the size of your company. Like if you're an enormous company, it doesn't really matter. Any press is good press if you get remembered. But for a small business, it's really important to be in tune with your customers and elicit positive emotions so that they think they regard you well and they want to engage with you. So I think that's important to figure out how to elicit those particular emotions.
I think you're exactly right. So let me, I don't know if this is belaboring this point. Should you go out with, what would you call it, an intention for a specific emotion? Like right now, I want my audience to feel afraid, or I want them to feel capable, or I want them to, like, is that something you should include in your strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
I don't know either.
Again, it's
unintended, right? You could do whatever it is that you do. You're conveying information, but you can't predict how they're going to feel.
Yeah, I think what you can do is to experiment with it and to have those intentions as you write particular content and to see what works. And that would be, I think that'd be a really cool experiment to find out about that. I don't know. I would imagine, though, again, like I'm a bit on the outside of marketing generally, but I would imagine that that's something that many people do think about when they're writing content. So yeah, I think it's an interesting strategy and one definitely to experiment with.
So let's talk about this quote unquote death of email. Now, I remember, oh my gosh, it's been about 4 years, maybe. I can't recall exactly when, but I was at a conference and social media was like, Facebook was just kind of gearing up, right? Yep. And there was a whole contingent of folks that were saying the whole email marketing thing, that's on the outs. Everyone's going to be having conversations on social. And like, lo and behold, we're having conversations here on social. I have conversations. Sure. I have email conversations on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, but email has not gone away. I still find that it's very, very useful. It's actually turned into my to-do list, right?
Yep.
But let's peer into the future and let's make the assumption that we are going to need individualized personal communication and information.
Yep.
Right?
Right.
Where do you see it going?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't see email going away anytime soon. I think there have been a number of attempts to dethrone email. And I think that you're right. There are different platforms that we use for different types of communication, each of which has its own particular strengths and weaknesses, and really, in the end, its own particular best use case. So I think there recently has been a lot of thought about chatbots and how those can be useful. I think the interest in those is waning a bit. I don't think the technology is necessarily there at the point where it becomes anything beyond basically a glorified, when you like dial into the phone system, it says, press this to speak to an agent, this, and you just end up yelling at the phone. I think in many ways it's just transitioning that into text. So the other real advancement has been in-app chat, things like Intercom, which I think is incredibly useful. In fact, we use it all the time. But I really think it's for a different type of communication. It's for that question and answer, that immediate response type of interaction that is a part of your business strategy, right? Like you want to engage customers with the chat. If say they're like looking at trying to do something and they can't figure it out, you want to just send them a quick message. But really the more formal or more informative kind of long format information, that's really a kind of an awful venue for that. And in fact, we've experienced that because sometimes if you miss an intercom chat, it'll send it to their email. And I've sent things that are just meant to be just like a casual, like, oh, just do this. And then it goes to their email and you're like, oh God, I just sent this, like, that shouldn't have been an email. I should have written that out and like been a bit more thoughtful about it. So each different platform has a different use case. And I think email, the use case is very clear and it's clear to so many businesses and they're still using it. It's not that it's going away anytime soon. I don't know of any technology that's going to replace it at this point. I'm sure at some point in the future, something like telepathy will replace it, right? So it'll just directly beam into our customers' minds, but we're certainly not there yet. And I really see a pretty clear future for email. With that said, I think we need to be more thoughtful and more mindful about the way that we use it so that it remains relevant and it remains something that we want to engage in. If it gets to the point where it's just literally it's just crap and you just have spam and junk, then it is in many ways like we do have that, and we have a lot of spam out there, but some intelligent spam filters kind of help us deal with that and help us wade through. But it's important for as a business to keep relevant so that we don't get caught in that just trash spam filter. I don't want to pay attention to that company. They just send me garbage. But I think there's a clear future for email. I don't see it going away anytime soon.
So you said there's a clear use case for email. So let's just kind of go through some, what would you call it, netiquette?
Yeah.
When is it the best, when is a communication email worthy?
Yeah, so on our platform, we focus on mostly drip email campaigns. So there's a couple of really clear cases where you have these particular behaviors that you want to, and particular interactions that you want to have with your customers. Things like onboarding, things like retention sequences, like when you see somebody who's not really engaged, you want to start engaging them and try to lure them back, because obviously the lifetime value of an existing customer is quite a bit more than trying to go out and get new customers that can often cost more. So engagement, abandoned cart, things like that, those are great examples of when you should be emailing people. And I think generally kind of informational, I know a lot of people send out like informational newsletters. That's a great example. If it's something that is relevant and relevant and useful. So like I get some emails from a data science company that I really like, who puts out these blog posts, which are really useful, and they're always tutorials, and I love their content, and I really enjoy engaging with it. But there's a lot of newsletters that are just like, hey, we're still alive, like don't forget about us, and that's not really so useful. It's important to be informative. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important, right? We make certain
Absolutely.
decisions about, for example, how many emails go back and forth before we pick up the phone.
Yep.
Right? Will you make that decision of, can I do this over email, or should I be doing this? Is this a conversation worthy, right?
Sure. Right.
There are things that we can totally share on social media or on Twitter, but you got to know that about your audience. Is your audience on Twitter? Is even in you and I getting together, you're an email guy. I did not tweet you, hey, I'm in the green room.
Yeah.
You would not see that, right? You would not see that. So, it's kind of knowing what platform to use when. And that means taking time to really know who your customers are and the issues that they're dealing with. If it's going to be relevant.
Yep, absolutely.
Right? So any
Yep.
parting words? What do you see happening in the future? Where do you see, is AI and bots and all this stuff, is it too soon to be paying attention to this stuff?
No, I think now is the right time to be paying attention. I think it's important, though, to, well, it's very hyped, right? So I think it's important to distinguish between things that are called AI that are not actually AI, and things that are really going to make your life easier.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I think for me, really the distinction is that sort of action and reaction type of behavior. And I think there's a lot of things that people call AI that are just sort of basic predictive intelligence, which is useful, right? But I think it's not taking the next step. So that's where I see the distinction. And just generally, like, I think it's important to be a bit skeptical. Of course, as a scientist, that's like sort of my job, is to be skeptical of everything. But there's a lot of companies who say they're AI, and it's important to pay attention to whether it's something that's actually doing something relevant. In the end, it doesn't matter if it's AI, but if it's doing something that helps you, that's useful. But with that said, I think now is a great time to pay attention to this, because some of these tools that allow us to build really intelligent and useful and powerful products like this are getting in the hands of more people who are capable to build great things. And I think there's a sort of renaissance now in that previously these tools were really only available to enterprise customers, these huge, like, multinational corporations with multi-billion dollar budgets, and the tools themselves were absurdly expensive. And I think we're beyond that point, where now some of these tools are accessible to smaller and medium-sized businesses that really can make use of them to help push their business further and really just kind of grow at a better pace.
Well, awesome. Well, there you have it, people. Keep on top of the AI, keep on top of deep learning, machine learning, bots. Keep your eye on the prize and make sure, automate so that you can engage. That's what it's all about. Want to thank dear guest, Jacob. It's so great to have you from Optimail.
Yes, thank you so much.
Check out, is it optimail.com? Check it out. What's the URL?
It's optimail.io.
Optimail.io. I stand corrected. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it. And thanks to all of your audience members for such great questions and being engaged.